Foreign affairs and diplomacy. The Confederates' hopes for securing independence hinged as much on its diplomats as on soldiers. Confederate leaders fully expected that Cotton would indeed prove to be king and induce Britain or France, or both, to give direct aid to the war effort. Besides depending on cotton for their textile mills, wealthy British industrialists and members of the British aristocracy looked forward with pleasure to the breakup of the American democratic experiment. From the Union's point of view, it was critically important to prevent the Confederacy from gaining the foreign support and recognition it desperately needed. Trent Affair. Britain came close to siding with the Confederacy in late 1861 over an incident at sea. Confederate diplomats James Mason and John Slidell were traveling to England on a British steamer, the Trent, on a mission to gain recognition for their government. A Union warship stopped the British ship, moved Mason and Slidell, and brought them to the U.S. as prisoners of war. Britain threatened war over the incident unless the two diplomats were released. Despite intense public criticism, Lincoln gave in to the British demands. Mason and Slidell were duly set free, but after sailing for Europe, they failed to obtain full recognition of the Confederacy from either Britain or France. Confederate raiders. The Confederates were able to gain enough recognition as a belligerent to purchase warships from British shipyards. Confederate commerce raiders did serious harm to the U.S. merchant ships. One of them, the Alabama, captured more than 60 vessels before being sunk off the coast of France by a Union warship. After the war, Great Britain eventually agreed to pay the U.S. $15.5 million for damages caused by the South's commerce raiders. The U.S. Minister to Britain, Charles Francis Adams, prevented a potentially much more serious threat, learning that the Confederacy had arranged to purchase layered rams, ships with iron rams, from Britain to use against the Union's naval blockade. Adams persuaded the British government to cancel the sale rather than risk war with the U.S. Failure of cotton diplomacy. In the end, the South's hope for European intervention were disappointed. King Cotton did not have enough power to dictate another nation's foreign policy. Since Europe quickly found ways of obtaining cotton from other sources, by the time shortages of southern cotton hit the British textile industry, adequate shipments of cotton began arriving from Egypt and India. Also, materials other than cotton could be used for textiles, and the woolen and linen industries were not slow to take advantage of their opportunity. Two other factors went into Britain's decision to not recognize the Confederacy. First, as mentioned, General Lee's setback at Antietam played a role. Without seeking a decisive Confederate military victory, the British government would not risk recognition. Second, Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, January 1863, made the end of slavery an objective to the Union, the position that appealed strongly to Britain's working class. While conservative leaders of Britain were sympathetic to the Confederates, they could not defy the pro-Northern anti-slavery feelings for the British majority. End of slavery. Even though Lincoln in the 1850s spoke out against slavery as an unequalified evil, as president, he seemed hesitant to take action against slavery as advocated by many of his Republican supporters. Lincoln's concerns included 1. Keeping the support of the border states, 2. The constitutional protections of slavery, 3. The racial prejudice of many Northerners, and 4. The fear that premature action could be overturned in the next election. All these concerns made the timing and method of ending slavery fateful decisions. Enslaved individuals were freed during the Civil War as a result of military events, governmental policies, and their own actions. Confiscation Acts. Early in the war, May 1861, Union General Benjamin Butler refused to return captured slaves to their Confederate owners, arguing that they were a contraband of war. The power to seize enemy property used to wage war against the U.S. was the legal basis for the first Confiscation Act, passed by Congress in August 1861. Soon after the passage of this act, thousands of contrabands were using their feet to escape slavery by finding their own way into Union camps. By July 1862, Congress had passed a second Confiscation Act and freed persons enslaved by anyone engaged in the rebellion against the U.S. The law also empowered the president to use freed slaves in the Union Army in any capacity, including battle. Emancipation Proclamation. By July 1862, Lincoln had already decided to use his powers as commander-in-chief of the armed forces to free all enslaved persons in the states, and then at war with the U.S. He justified his policy as a military necessity. Lincoln delayed announcement of policy, however, until he could win the support of the conservative Northerners. At the same time, he encouraged the border states to come up with plans for emancipation, with compensation to the owners. After the Battle of Antietam on September 22nd, 1862, Lincoln issued a warning that enslaved people in all states still in the rebellion on January 1st, 1863, would be thenceforth and forever free. As promised on the first day of the new year, 1863, the president issued his Emancipation Proclamation. After listing states from Arkansas to Virginia that were in the rebellion, the proclamation stated, "I do order and declare that all persons held as slaves within said designated states and parts of the states are and henceforward shall be free, and that the executive government of the U.S., including the military and naval authorities thereof, shall recognize and maintain the freedom of said persons." Consequences. Since the president's proclamation applied to only enslaved people residing in the Confederate States outside Union control, it immediately freed only about 1% of slaves. Slavery in the border states was allowed to continue. Even so, the proclamation of major importance because it was enlarged the purpose of war. For the first time, Union armies were fighting against slavery, not merely against secession. The proclamation added weight to the Confiscation Acts, increasing the number of slaves who sought freedom by fleeing to Union lines. Thus, with each advance of the Northern troops into the South, abolition advanced as well. As an added blow to the Confederacy, the proclamation also authorized the use of freed slaves, Union soldiers. Suddenly, the Union Army had thousands of and dedicated new recruits. 13th Amendment. Standing in the way of full emancipation, there were phrases in the U.S. Constitution that had long legitimized slavery. To free all enslaved people to the border states, the country needed to ratify a constitutional amendment. Even the abolitionists gave Lincoln credit for playing an active role in the political struggle to secure enough votes for Congress to pass the 13th Amendment. By December 1865, months after Lincoln's death, the amendment abolishing slavery was ratified by the required number of states. The language of the amendment could not be simpler or clearer. Neither slavery or involuntary servitude, except as punishment for a crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or in any place subject to their jurisdiction. Freedmen in the war. After the Emancipation Proclamation, January 1863, hundreds of thousands of Southern blacks, approximately 1/4 of the slave population, walked away from slavery to seek protection of the approaching Union armies. Almost 200,000 African Americans, most of whom were newly freed slaves, served in the Union Army and Navy, segregated into all black units, such as the Massachusetts 54th Regiment. Black troops performed courageously under fire and won the respect of Union white soldiers. More than 37,000 African American soldiers died in what became known as the Army of Freedom.